Welcome to the Rutherford Times Podcast, a podcast about pop culture, geek culture, and everything in between. Entertainment, celebrity...
Ladies and gentlemen, the Bit of It Show.
All right, enough of that. We were trying a new jingle. I didn't realize there was actually going to be a voice at that, so we're going to get it. We're going to try and find another jingle for this show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a retrospective of the famous OJ Simpson Bronco Chase. Yesterday was the 20th anniversary of that event. If you're old enough to remember what it was like to watch the NBA Finals and to also have the OJ Simpson chase taking place, there's a fascinating documentary that you should really watch. It's on ESPN's 30 for 30 list. You can find it on, Netflix, but you can probably find it on YouTube too. It's called June 17th, 1994. And instead of being a talking head kind of documentary, it basically takes you through the fact that the U.S. Open was in the second round. It was Arnold Palmer's last round as a professional in the U.S. Open. It was the opening day of the 1994 World Cup in the United States. It was also the day the Rangers of New York celebrated their Stanley Cup win. And it was also Game 5 of the NBA Finals. The series was tied at 2 games apiece between the Knicks and the Rockets. But all that was being overshadowed by the fact that O.J. Simpson's ex-wife, and a friend of hers, Ron Goldman, Nicole Brown Simpson was the former wife, were murdered a few days earlier. They had been investigating O.J. Simpson, but they had not officially named him the main suspect. Well, Friday, they announced that they were going to arrest O.J. Simpson for the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. Originally, he was supposed to surrender at 11 o'clock Pacific time. That later became 11:45. Neither time did he show up, so the LAPD put out an all-points bulletin for O.J. Simpson. And that's when it began to get crazy. If you've watched this documentary, you know what I'm talking about. The local stations were all over this like a fly on poop. The networks were going to eventually interrupt their broadcast that evening to cover the event. CNN was all over it. Larry King contributed most of his show, if not all of his show, to that chase. It was a massive, massive news event that would, in the course of a year and a half, dramatically change the media in this country. Not necessarily for the better. Let's first of all remember that before the murders, O.J. Simpson was a very popular guy. He was an NBC Sports commentator in football and other sports. He was a well-respected and well-in-demand pitchman for any product out there. He even acted on the Naked Gun movies with Leslie Nielsen. He was a guy that did it all. He was a professional football player that broke the 2,000-yard mark in rushing for the Buffalo Bills. He won a Heisman Trophy with Southern Cal back in the late 60s. He was huge. No one saw this coming. When I heard that Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman had been murdered, I didn't think O.J. Simpson did it at first. I thought, well, it was unfortunate. You know, it was probably one of those things that maybe it was a crime. But I never imagined O.J. Simpson actually killed his ex-wife and this other guy. I didn't think that. I didn't know, like many Americans didn't know, that OJ had a history of domestic violence. Because back then, that wasn't really covered that well. You didn't know that your athletes beat their wives or girlfriends or whatnot. That wasn't widely reported back then. And the only time it did was if the law got involved directly. And even then, it usually was, well, you know, if it wasn't that severe, we'll let the local news handle it because we don't want to rush to judgment. Because what if the guy didn't actually do it? You know, we don't want to besmirch his reputation. That was back then. This is now. And a lot of it is because of the OJ Simpson case. Now, if you remember the chase, you remember that it started out as a slow chase with about maybe 9-10 police cars behind this white Ford Bronco. Abe Cowlings, I think it's AJ Cowlings, AC Cowlings, was driving the car. OJ was in the back. He had a gun and he was threatening to kill himself. They basically gave him plenty of leeway. This was a situation they knew could be very, very dangerous. It became even more dangerous when you had thousands upon thousands of people stop their cars, get off on the freeway, get out of their cars, and watch the chase go by on foot. Overpasses were crowded, everything else. It was the most bizarre sight I'd ever seen at that time. And as they made the turn off of the highway and onto regular streets to get back to his house in Brentwood, it became even more surreal. And if you've watched that documentary, I highly recommend you watch it. It'll give you what it felt like that night. It was absolutely unbelievable. But in the weeks and months after the arrest, most of the people that I knew, and most of them are white, realized that maybe, just maybe, he actually did it. I really didn't know. I was kind of like, well, maybe he was set up by somebody. Maybe he was being unfairly charged with this because the police and the LAPD was 2 years removed from the Rodney King beating, the trial, and the verdicts that basically set off the LA riots. You got to remember that. So the feeling was, if he did it, could he actually get a fair trial? Could he actually, the LAPD's image was in tatters after the riots and before the riots, and Mark Furman didn't exactly help the prosecution's case. Looking back at the case, and I remember because I was working electronics at a store called Rose's back then, and I was working, and basically it was a situation, a small store. We had cable TV, and every morning I would turn on ESPN because at that time they were running SportsCenter through the mornings, and at noon, after I got back from lunch, on came CNN for the trial at 12 noon Eastern, which was 9 a.m. Pacific, which is when the trial began. And that was on until 4 o'clock when I went home. Looking back at that trial, and I watched a lot of it, I watched the highlights and everything else at night. It was very fascinating. The problem with the prosecution is they tried too hard to convict OJ Simpson on DNA evidence. They got too technobabblish for the jurors. What they should have done was emphasize that he had the motive, that his alibi was shaky. Instead of actually having him put on the gloves, what they should have done is have him make a cast of his hand and then put the gloves on that cast, on the mold that they made, put that on that cast of his hand, and to where, the way he wears it, that glove, the old saying, if it doesn't fit, you must have quit. If you look at the way he wears that glove, it's kind of like he's trying to make sure it doesn't go on there quite right. I'm not saying that it actually really fit, but if I can make a glove not fit either, unless it's like really way too big for my hand, And plus, who's to say, maybe he wore small gloves intentionally to make sure that he couldn't get caught. But the verdict. Yes, I was surprised. I think a lot of it was the fact the prosecution did not do as good of a job of prosecuting this case as they should have. I think that the fact that it was televised and became a national spectacle hurt the prosecution. I think it influenced the jurors to a certain degree. I think that Lance Ito's decisions reflected more about the coverage that the media was giving the trial. It would have been a lot different had you not been able to watch the trial. The impact of being able to watch this trial live every single day from lunchtime until 8 o'clock in the evening was tremendous. Then you had a highlight show on CNN, which at that time was the only 24-hour news channel at that time, the major news channel. There were a few others that were, there was America's Talk, and it eventually became MSNBC. But MSNBC and Fox News didn't come along until 1996. And the reason those were launched was in part because of the immense ratings and coverage that CNN got for airing the trial. It showed that tabloid journalism could sell in America on television. We already knew it could sell at the newsstand. But now it was selling, and this goes back to an argument that I had with somebody at the time. Was this vital news? If you're in the LA area, of course, it's a local celebrity that allegedly killed his wife and her boyfriend, lover, friend, whatever. But was it a truly national story? That's debatable. Should it have gotten all the coverage it got? That's debatable. ESPN didn't put the trial on live wall to wall. They put on segments of it. They put the verdict on, but not the whole trial. CNN did, though. Why? Because CNN needed ratings. The novelty of being the 24-hour news channel was starting to wear off a bit. The Gulf War was over with. The 1992 election was over with. And really, the 94 election had gone, and the ratings were still kind of... So this was a ratings winner for CNN. Big time. The problem, of course, is the fact that it brought in journalism that jumped the gun. Remember in 1993 that Michael Jackson was accused of child molestation? that never went to trial. Unlike a few years later when in the 2000s when he did go to trial and was subsequently acquitted. But the 93 case never was tried. It would not surprise me if there were people who at CNN or other networks, other people in the media who wanted a trial just to get the ratings. Why? Because news, if you're just talking about, let's say right now, the Iraq situation with ISIS and the fact that Iran is wanting to get involved to help the Iranian government, which is Shiite. The Sunnis are the ones that are causing the problems in the north. So, the problem with the media these days is that we're so used to breaking news that it's not really breaking news anymore. When every hour you lead off with, here's breaking news of a story that really isn't breaking news. Breaking news is a tornado in Kansas that is happening right now. It's not breaking news as if it happened 2 days ago and you're now still talking about it. What happened to that Malaysian flight? It was all over the news for the longest time, and now people have pretty much forgotten it. So here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. Looking back at what we've seen over the course of the last few months, the problem with the media these days is very simple. They do not want you to know that most of the stories are either heavily slanted, especially on Fox. They like to talk about liberal media bias on CNN and MSNBC and all the other mainstream media, or as that idiot Sarah Palin likes to call lamestream media. Very witty there, Ms. Palin. Here's the thing. It would have been okay if you had sort of the same slant on a conservative basis on Fox News. Fox News overcompensates. Now, Fox News is not about entirely being on the up and up about journalism, especially when you consider the guy that runs the network, Roger Ailes, is a former GOP operative, political operative. He worked for Reagan, he worked for George H.W. Bush. So you're telling me a guy that was heavily in Republican politics is all of a sudden going to be a pure and true journalist, fair and balanced. Have I got some news for you? No. He's going to pretend that he's being fair and balanced. He's going to complain about the liberal media bias, which there is very little truth to that. Even if there is, it's mainly because it's coming out of New York, and what is fair and balanced in New York may not be perceived as such in central Ohio or middle Tennessee or the upstate of South Carolina or in Texas or in Wyoming. The fact is, media bias has always been around because guess what? You can never really report on a story if you have an opinion about a story. It's not about objective. It's about being subjective. It's about being at least being honest enough to give all points of the story. But it's like this. If there is a clearly wrong, like there's an obvious murder. Guy in the middle of broad daylight shoots his ex-girlfriend in a Walmart parking lot. Plenty of witnesses to see it. He gets tackled from behind. The police come along, arrest him, take him to trial. Yeah, the reason he did it, maybe he was psychologically damaged by going to Iraq or Afghanistan, or he was just mentally damaged from the fact his wife cheated on him. But murder is murder. He killed his wife. But here's the thing. If you watch Fox News, but you watch other news sources, you begin to pick up on things. First of all, Fox and the GOP are very tight together. You don't hear much criticism of the GOP on their network unless it's someone who dares to go against the Tea Party. It's usually some Republican who wants to compromise to get something done. Before, yeah, you could compromise and you wouldn't be crucified for breaking the Republican purity. With Fox News, not so much. Eric Cantor the other week got beat because he dared to try and reach a compromise on immigration. To the Tea Partiers, that was considered weakness. They, instead of re-electing someone who actually was sort of traditional and actually might get stuff done if he really wasn't so ass-deep in Republican politics and the way that they're basically obstructionist right now, the Tea Party chosen candidate won. A guy that claimed he went to Princeton, I think it was, and actually didn't. A guy who some of his political positions, his campaign manager is trying to clean off his Facebook page. When you have to clean off stuff off your Facebook page, that raises signals. So, Democrats may pick up that seat after all. I know we veered off into this, but it all goes back to the fact that on June 17th, 1994, the media bought in to the coverage of the OJ Simpson case. Hook, line, and sinker. They bought into it because it mixed sports with Hollywood. People ate it up. People wanted more. They wanted more. They got plenty of it in 1995. The Braves won the World Series in 1995. Most people don't even realize that. They know when the OJ Simpson case took place. 1995. Baseball was trying to bounce back. Good luck with that, because most everybody was watching the OJ Simpson trial. They were watching highlights of it. Looking back at that trial, the biggest mistake that was made was televising it. Because no matter what happened, the jury's verdict was always going to be dissected. Was he guilty of murder? I believe he was. A subsequent civil case found him responsible for the murders. He has to pay the families of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson a hell of a lot of money, which, it's kind of hard because he's in prison now for something entirely different. The irony of OJ Simpson is the murder he probably did, he got off on. The crime that he probably did not commit, that he was convicted of, he probably should not be in jail for, but they found him guilty because he got put in a trap. If you've looked into the O.J. Simpson Las Vegas trial for, basically it was, some guy had his Heisman Trophy. He was going there to get it. I can't remember all exact details, but apparently they considered it a break-in, and O.J. Simpson was sold out by the people that broke in. And was this because it was OJ Simpson and there were people who felt like he got away with murder and this was an opportunity to make him pay for what he did? Would not surprise me one bit. Let's face it. There are many African Americans who at the time considered him to be innocent who've come around and think he's guilty of sin now. You have to remember the verdict came 2 years after the LA riots in LA. African Americans were celebrating, not all of them, but plenty of them. I knew some African Americans who actually thought he was guilty. A couple of them I worked with. Most were rejoicing, not because they necessarily felt O.J. Simpson was innocent, but because they felt like, hey, one of us got away with something 4 white officers got away with 2 years earlier. Most of the people that became celebrities after that trial, Marsha Clark, Christopher Darden, the defense team, whose names Robert Shapiro, Johnny Cochran. Johnny Cochran's passed away. Robert Shapiro's still around. You can blame the O.J. Simpson trial for the Kim Kardashian and the Kardashian families becoming famous because Robert Kardashian was a friend of O.J. Simpson. He actually read the suicide note of O.J. Simpson while the chase was going, while they were trying to find O.J. Simpson. He read it at a press conference with Robert Shapiro. So that's how Robert Kardashian became famous. That's why the Kardashians are on television. Because of that link. And because Kim Kardashian produced a video with Ray J that was rather racy. Which goes to show that in an indirect way, admittedly an indirect way, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say Kim Kardashian is directly famous because her father was a friend of O.J. Simpson who killed 2 people. Therefore, Kim Kardashian is famous because of the death of 2 people. But the reality is, if O.J. Simpson had not killed those 2 people, would we even know who Robert Kardashian is? Would we know who Kim Kardashian is or anything else? Probably not. So it is a logical assumption that if O.J. Simpson didn't kill, or if these 2 people weren't killed by whoever killed them, whether if O.J. Simpson was innocent, would this have made them famous? Probably not. Would we have the tabloid culture we have now had the O.J. Simpson trial never happened at all? What if O.J. Simpson had realized that he had been guilty? He turned himself in, copped a plea, went to jail, no trial, no nothing. It is logical to assume that maybe, just maybe, Fox News and MSNBC never make it to air. Or if they do, they don't succeed. Because what happens after that is the news media needs something to feed on. What were minor scandals now become major scandals. What was an indiscretion by the president with an intern becomes a huge bit of drama. We had the impeachment hearings. And I remember they were still working at Rose's, still had them on TV, and I predicted the House would impeach, the Senate would not have the votes to convict. It happened exactly as I predicted. And I made that prediction when President Clinton admitted that he had an affair with Monica Lewinsky. And the only reason it even came out was Bill Clinton did not pay off Paula Jones. If he paid off Paula Jones and admitted that he and Paula Jones had a little incident, this never would have come to light. The media would have had to find something else. The media in this country now is all about the next big story, how it can get viewers in, how we can make something that isn't a real story but has intriguing personalities. Like Kim Kardashian, like the Robertson family of Duck Dynasty. Did you really care if you never heard of Phil? If they'd never had a television show, would you have cared if some owner of some duck call making company was making homophobic comments through a pulpit? No. Because he had a TV show, which I don't know why he has a TV show. It's popular for some bizarre reason, but, you know. But here's the thing. The OJ Simpson trial opened up a can of worms that we're never going to return back to. Before, you had news as being, well, these breaking stories are major, but it was usually a disaster, usually a very important political issue. Now, celebrities were dominating the news. When Michael Jackson had his second trial, or second accusation of child molestation go to trial, the media was all over it. Even though the cameras were not in the courtroom, you still had plenty of coverage of that trial. It was bizarre. And I remember the verdict. When they found him not guilty, there were plenty of people who thought he was going to go to jail. I was on the fence. It wasn't like it was in 95, which was almost roughly 10 years between trials. We didn't know, not for certain, whether or not he was guilty. If the cameras had been in the courtroom for the MJ trial, Michael Jackson trial, who knows what would have happened? The media in this country are not about being fair anymore. It's all about ratings. It's all about getting advertisers to put huge amounts of money on getting high ad rates to make a lot of money. And if you notice, not all of it is selling you groceries or toothpaste or anything else. A lot of it is politically motivated stuff on NBC, on MSNBC, on CNN, on Fox, what have you. Political think tanks are advertising on these networks. And I've watched CNN fairly a bit recently, especially during the Malaysian crash, to kind of to study what they were doing to cover it. Here's the thing. The way they covered that trial, or the way I should say, the way they covered that case was so insane it was not even funny. Looking back at it, Don Lemon suggested maybe, just maybe, aliens may have taken the plane. No. They came up with so many cockamamie theories, they still don't know where the damn plane is. 30 years before, Anwar Sadat was assassinated in Egypt. They didn't have satellite technology the way they do now. So you couldn't go wall-to-wall coverage on the major networks. CNN was just a small-time player back then. You know, if you had cable, if you were lucky enough to have cable, you could watch that. When Reagan got shot, you know, The networks were scrambling to get people on the ground. Most of the time, you were watching a reporter either in the studio or a talking head in front of a microphone somewhere on a live remote. And you were watching over and over again that the footage of Reagan being shot. Looking back at what happened that day, and then when Reagan was shot, and then 20 years later, when 9/11 took place, and let's face it, if Reagan had died, that would have been almost as equal to it. Reagan luckily survived. Of course, he didn't tell us how close he actually came to dying. But the fact was that the media culture 20 years later had changed. And 9/11 was all over the place. But here's the thing. What if 9/11 happened again? Or let's not go there. What if, God forbid, Barack Obama was assassinated? And let me stress when I say that, this is hypothetical. I may not agree with everything politically Obama does, but I sure as hell don't want to wish any ill will toward our president. I didn't think the same way about Bush or any of them. He's the president of the United States. He represents us. Whether you like him or you don't like him, when you wish ill will towards him, I think you're unpatriotic and a traitor. But hypothetically speaking, let's say tomorrow the president is assassinated. How does Fox cover that and actually look like they are truly sorrowful? How does CNN cover it? More importantly, how does the internet cover it? 20 years ago, nobody heard of Alex Jones. Nobody heard of the cockamamie conspiracy theories because the internet was so tiny back in 1994. Here's the crazy thing. In 1995, when the OJ Simpson trial was going on, you barely heard of the internet. It was, I barely heard of it. 1 year later, during the election of 1996, you started hearing about websites. Because at the Democratic Convention in 1996, I think it was in, wasn't in New York. Where was it? I can't think of it. Well, when that was taking place, you started hearing about websites and how websites are and then the Atlanta Olympics come along, and then you heard about Atlanta's Olympic website and the fact it was crashing, and the web traffic was reporters trying to get stories out. 1 year changed a lot. The internet was around in 1995, but it wasn't as big of player as it was a year later. When the Olympic Park bombing happened, you had people rushing the internet to find out the latest reports and whatnot. And then 5 years after that, you had the internet firmly established. You had people with camcorders and plenty of them. Pretty much everybody had a cell phone back then for the most part, especially if you lived in a large city. So you had a lot of pictures, you had a lot of video. There's not much film of the Kennedy assassination. You had the famous Zapruder film. You've got some others showing the end tail right after the aftermath of the shooting, right immediately after the shooting. You've got the film that shows the president's limousine turning onto Elm Street. If it happened now, you would have umpteen angles with people with video cameras on their phones, shooting the president's limousine and such with this video. And you'd have a hell of a lot of videos uploaded. And unless the Secret Service and FBI and everybody were trying to get all these camcorders and such, that stuff would be uploaded so fast. A lot of smartphones these days automatically upload videos. They've got, if you, and in some cases, it's actually streamed live. So let's take for a moment. Let's say it happened in a similar situation. Obama's. They're not going to be crazy enough to put him in an open-air car in this day and age through a major metropolitan area. But let's say, theoretically speaking, that he is outside and he's giving a speech in a park, and somehow he gets shot and killed. You've got all these people with video cameras and camcorders on their phones and picture taking abilities and live streaming and everything else. It would be insane. So instead of too little information like Walter Cronkite and his other colleagues at other networks at the time, you'd have so much going on to try and cobble up what happened. So in a sense, what might take place is the very thing that happened. Yeah, let's say there was a single gunman, like in the Kennedy case. There's still people who believe that there was more than one gunman. I tend to think that there's a real distinct possibility because the head went back and to the left. And it's a Zapruder film. Does it mean I'm right? No. There is a reason to doubt the official report. Because of a lack of information, because of a lack of video, because of a lack of witnesses. It happened so fast that people probably didn't even realize what really was going on before them. Now you've got all this video. But even with all the video and all this, it's going to be people jostling around, trying to hold the camera straight. When the shots ring out, they're going to flinch. It's going to make the video shake. You're not going to have a full... Even a professional cameraman or woman, when you fire a gun near them, they're going to flinch. So... In that case, ladies and gentlemen, even with the most sophisticated technology, if that were to happen, God forbid, if it ever happened, there is a good chance we could have another conspiracy theory, and it holds watertight. Why? Because too much information can be just as bad as too little. Because if you're overloaded with information, and that's the thing about the OJ Simpson case. There was so much information coming in back then. You had so much going on that people obsessed over it. They were obsessing over every little detail that it put doubt in their minds where there may very well have not been any doubt. So now, 20 years later, you still do not have a firm idea if he actually did it. Yeah, there are plenty more people now who believe he did it than back 20 years ago. But we don't know. Why? Because people never got the satisfactory verdict, because there is this perception that the jury was affected by the media coverage. There is this perception that the judge was ruling not entirely for the case for the best interest of the case. Did he go home at night and watch the Dancing Idos on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno? Maybe. Was Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden actually happy that they were getting to be famous? Yes. Before the OJ Simpson trial, nobody knew who the hell they were. Afterwards, warts and all, they got to be famous. They later found out both of those folks were actually kind of, Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden allegedly got involved romantically. So, yeah, that came out. But the fact is, looking back at the OJ Bronco Chase 20 years ago, innocence was lost. It's kind of bizarre because look at the way the world was before Kennedy was assassinated. And look at how it became afterwards. Look how the world was before O.J. Simpson killed his ex-wife, and her friend Ron Goldman. And look how it became afterwards. Look how the world changed after 9/11. You don't have to kill a president or commit the worst terrorist attack in American history to fundamentally change this country. You just have to get a trial on television that millions of people watch and pay attention to and obsess over and talk about the water cooler or the break room the next day and just go absolutely nuts over. And when the verdict is finally reached, there's no clear-cut winner. Even though the jury said they found O.J. Simpson not guilty, there's still many people who think justice was not done. Once upon a time, I thought it was a good idea to put cameras in courtrooms and cameras in Congress. I'm not so sure of that anymore. When you have cameras on the congressional floor, there's a lot of speechifying, there's a lot of showmanship, there's a lot of playing to the camera. Politics is not a very clean business, Dirty deals get done to get stuff moving. Not the case anymore. When every little detail of every little bit of legislation is minced and pieced together and put under a microscope by especially conservative media. If you listen to conservative media 24/7, you're going to think Obama's the worst president since Adolf Hitler. And he wasn't even president. If you listen to liberal media back in the day, when Bush was in office, you think he was the worst president in history. Looking back at the O.J. Simpson case, other big-time media stories, the hostage crisis in the 1980s, in 1979, 1980. That was huge. Every night, the X number of days our hostages have been in Iran. You remember that? Do you remember that? Are you old enough to remember that? I am. I was a little kid, and that was something I saw every night on CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. The count up of the days our hostages were in Iran. But here's the thing. What about the aftermath of that? What about the fact that we backed Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran? What about the fact that 3 years after the end of that war, that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and we went in and freed Kuwait? The ramifications of stories in the short term aren't always apparent. But in the long term, you can look back and go, Did we really need to go into Iraq to free Kuwait? That's a hard question to ask. And that's the thing that in the instant gratification era of the media, and this was becoming very apparent even before the OJ Simpson trial. It's a problem. Look at what happened on 9/11. You had all these rumors going around. There were bombs on the Brooklyn Bridge. There was planes falling out of the sky, crashing into other planes, and I think there was one report of a plane crashing into the old Sears Tower in Chicago. But TV pictures showed that didn't happen. Rumors flying around. That's nothing new. I mean, that was going on when Kennedy was assassinated. What I want you to remember about the O.J. Simpson trial and the chase and the coverage and the trial is that the media wanted to get the story first. It went from getting the story right. The trend was already there. It just exacerbated the trend. Now it's all about getting ratings. Getting it first, and we'll worry about getting it right later. And in some cases, they'll make it right. What I want you to remember after this show is that not every story is the full story. If you can put a TV story together in 3 minutes, you might be able to cover the basic talking points of a story, even if it's something simple like a murder. This guy killed this woman because she was running around on him. And the only reason the boyfriend didn't get killed by this ex-boyfriend was he wasn't there at the time. And before that guy, the murderer, could find the current boyfriend, the police got to him. In time, you'll find out other parts of the story, but let's say the ex-boyfriend had nothing to do with it. The current boyfriend set up the ex-boyfriend because the current boyfriend got tired of the girlfriend's bullcrap. So the current boyfriend found a way to get the ex-boyfriend's gun, use it, frame the ex-boyfriend, and run away, claiming that he was being chased. There was a famous incident that happened here back in 1979. A guy by the name of James Hutchins killed some police officers after he came home, or his daughter came home, and after, I guess, she was a teenager, she got drunk. He was mad as hell about it. He smacked her around a bit, and the police were called out. This one deputy that was allegedly messing around with the guy's wife, allegedly. I think his name is Roy Husky, I believe it is. He got shot as well as another officer. Hutchins takes off. And had that happened today, even though we're still in a very rural county, you would have had LOS with a chopper in the air. You would have had WSPA. It would have been massive coverage. Hell, it may have gone national. It took hours to find this guy. They didn't even have proper radios because we were sort of backwoodsy back then. So you take that case, which was a very local case, got to be made into a B movie around here, which, was rather bad. Look up Rutherford County Line on YouTube, watch it, and you'll see that, yeah, it's kind of cheesy. Locals love it around here, but that's because it made a sheriff a movie star. When in fact, there's more to the story. Thinking critically when it comes to the media is important. What if O.J. Simpson didn't do it? What if he didn't? What if somebody else did it? Maybe a friend of his that was doing it because he wanted to he was mad at Nicole for embarrassing OJ. Maybe now Cowlings did it. Maybe AC Cowlings did it. I don't know. Maybe it was somebody else. Maybe it was the surfer dude. I can't think of the guy's name. Starts with a K. I can't think of it. That case, looking back at it, has got to be the most bizarre case I've ever watched, and probably even more bizarre than the John Wayne Bobbitt case and all these other cases. There was a time when big-time cases were all the rage, and it's still the rage to a certain degree. But sadly, or maybe in a way thankfully, we don't have to worry about that anymore, because Court TV is now True TV. They can't handle just all cases anymore. And but I don't know. I want to look back at that today because I didn't get a chance to do it yesterday. And I want you folks to understand that no matter what, we're always going to have to pay for the sins of our ancestors, in the sense that looking back at the way the media handled the Kennedy assassination, the Watergate, the fact that in some cases the media felt betrayed by the president and the White House and people in authority, that's come to roost. Once upon a time, the president could confide in reporters, and reporters would not, tell it until many years later. Now it's almost adversarial. It's not just president versus the media. It's even, your local high school coach can't trust the media. Or he's brought up not to trust the media because the media's out to get him, allegedly. So, anyhow, that's it. I went way longer than I actually meant to, but when is that a bad thing? So, anyhow, we're going to try and do a show tomorrow. I'm not sure what we'll be doing it on. And then we're going to do shows on Saturday and Sunday. I'm going to try and do more shows on the World Cup. Sunday, we may do a show after the World Cup, so keep an eye out for that. So I'm going to head back, go to bed here in a little bit because I got to get ready to go to work in the morning. Hopefully I will not upchuck. Lord knows I don't need to be doing that. So, folks, thank you for tuning in this evening. I hope you have a great evening and I hope you have a great day tomorrow. And for everybody here at RSN Radio, and this has been the Rutherford Times Podcast, good night, good luck, and may the good news be yours.